Hi, my name is Megan Wright, and I am a senior curator at Saatchi Art. We wanted to thank you for joining us for the global virtual edition of the Other Art Fair today. Today, we will be highlighting the work of three of our fair artists, Lisa Krannichfeld, Jason Wright, and Cynthia Grow. But prior to doing that, I wanted to talk a little bit about Saatchi Art and the Other Art Fair and how we work together. Typically at the fair in real life, the Other Art Fair, the Saatchi Art Advisory team will participate and lead tours, group tours, individual tours throughout the weekend. And so we're trying to do that in a virtual way this time, but we do encourage you to do all of the same things that we do in real life tours, which would be to contact us after the fair. If you have any questions about any of the work that you see, we are happy to contact the artist on your behalf, ask for additional images, ask for video, and help you navigate with our technology that allows you to view the work in your own room and make offers, etc. So please don't hesitate to reach out. You can contact us at curator@saatchiart.com. So a little bit of the history of the Other Art Fair. It was started in 2011 by Ryan Steiner as a way to allow artists to showcase their work, not over one weekend only, but over the course of a year throughout a variety of locales and with an invested team. So the team at the Other Art Fair are real, true art lovers, as is the team at Saatchi Art. They support the artists in any way that they can, and they work tirelessly to make this event as beautiful as possible. And so we do encourage you to attend the art fair, not only virtually, but in person when it's available in your area. This year marks the 10-year anniversary of the Other Art Fair. And it now is in 8 cities worldwide. It expanded from London to Sydney, Melbourne, New York, Dallas, Chicago, LA, and more to come. 44 fairs in total they have put on, and with 3,500 artists from over 20 countries worldwide, as well as a total sales of 32,000 artworks. And in 2016, the fair partnered with Saatchi Art, which was a great extension of the fair because, again, it allows for you to view the work throughout the year and allow the artists to showcase their work to a global audience and have the artwork seen by investors and collectors worldwide. The Saatchi Art was the creation of Rebecca Wilson, a former director at the Saatchi Gallery, in London. And she created this over 10 years ago. We've just celebrated our anniversary as well. And in those 10 years, Saatchi Art has sold over 100,000 artworks from 141 countries to collectors in 129 countries. So it's a pretty amazing feat. We have paid out over $67 million to artists. And we have a team of art advisors based in Los Angeles who work with individual collectors, designers, and other entities to recommend and help facilitate the acquisition of painting, sculpture, photography, etc. So with that, I will begin the tour today. We are going to be talking about the artistic process. And for many artists, the process is just as important as the finished product, if not more. Today, we will meet 3 artists to learn how these individuals utilize intuition and creativity and their individual skill set to create their unique and stunning work. So let's take a look a little deeper and notice the details. So first, we are going to speak with Lisa Krannichfeld. So we will enter the fair and go to Lisa's booth. And Lisa, you're welcome to turn on your camera when you're ready.
Okay. Hello, everyone.
Hi. So Lisa is based in Little Rock, Arkansas, where she grew up in a Chinese American family. Her work embraces her cultural diversity through not only her creative intent, but also the materials she uses. In 2019, she had the distinction of being the cover artist for Saatchi Art's inaugural Women in Art catalog, also known as the Refuse to be the Muse catalog. We found her approach to painting strong, uncompromising female portraits the perfect fit for the campaign. So when you attend the other art fair and Lisa is participating, inevitably her booth will be one of the most crowded, with attendees clamoring to get a close-up look at her exquisite combination of ink, watercolor, and collage that makes her pieces so incredibly dynamic and so very stunning. So thank you, Lisa, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So first, I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about your background and how you became interested in being an artist.
Like most kids, art was always my favorite class. It wasn't really a career choice in mind for me because I do not come from a family of artists. So that was a very foreign concept to be an artist just professionally. So I didn't really make that decision until college. My senior year of high school, I won an art scholarship that required me to declare to be an art major. So in a sense, I had to commit to it before I even knew I wanted to commit to it just to keep the money. So I'm super glad that I did, because once I had my senior thesis show in college, I never wanted to do anything else. So I've been making art and showing art ever since. I did teach art for a while in the very beginning after graduating, which was a lot of fun and I learned a lot teaching kids. But ultimately making art was what I wanted to do. And it was always in the back of my mind. And I'm happy to say I've been doing art full time for over 5 years now, and creating the work that I'm most proud of now. So you could say that art has always been a part of me, but it has definitely been a journey finding out on my own how to make it work, not coming from a family of artists.
And have you always created artwork in this way? Did you have a different medium, or did you always start with well, first you can tell us a little bit about your process, but was this something that came to you at first, or did you develop your path artistically?
I would say the figurative part has always been an interest of mine. I mean, even in high school, it was my favorite thing to draw. It was what I was always interested in learning about, like portraiture and me. So in that respect, that hasn't really changed much, but my choice of materials has definitely. When you're first learning, you just draw and then you learn how to paint. And then after all of the rules are taught, you learn how to break them and meld them to what you want to do. And so I started mixing a lot of materials, outside of the academic world. I just happened upon taking a Chinese calligraphy class in college. And that's where I discovered my love for the ink that I learned how to use in that class. And so I started obviously painting figures with that ink. And so that was kind of the stepping stone to lead me to where this work is now. And then I started mixing watercolor with that ink. And then I started mixing collage with that ink and watercolor. And then it just kind of built and built and built. And so currently, I usually always start a painting with ink and watercolor. And then if it's a more complex composition, I'll add in collaged areas. And those collage areas are combinations of Asian papers and cyanotypes, which is it's an alternative photography process. They use a sunlight, and it's normally blue, but sometimes I'll keep the blue tones, but sometimes to fit a certain color composition, I'll change it to black and tan. You can tone cyanotypes using different agents. And then all that, after all of that is done, I'll do a resin pour on the very end. So in that particular piece that you're looking at, I kept the blue tones of the cyanotypes, which are in the rug. If you look really closely there, you can tell that they're panthers. So that's the cyanotype portion. And then the other patterned areas are the Asian papers. And then the very loose expressive painted areas are the ink and watercolor. So right away, it's not quite easy to tell what's what, but once you look a little closer, things start to pop out as certain materials.
Is there a significance to, I remember that you use a lot of animals in your work. Is there a significance to the animal figures that you incorporate in these?
Yeah. Well, before I thought about being an artist, I wanted to be a zoologist.
Oh, really?
I was actually a double biology and art major in college.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, interesting little fun fact. But the animals, yeah, my work is all about expression and the body language and the facial expressions. And so the animals are just another layer to that expression. They're often very aggressive and snarling, and I particularly like using them in pieces where you can't see the face of the figure, and so they kind of give that expression, of what the face might look like if you could see it.
Do you use models for your work, or are they from?
Sometimes I will for the pose, but I kind of paint in a spontaneous way, which I really prefer to do, because the collage areas are so tight and detailed. I like to paint in a very loose way, but quite the opposite of the collaged areas. So it's always a surprise exactly how they're going to come out. I'll have kind of a vague look that I'm going for, but specific details and how the colors mix together are always a surprise. But I do strive to have a lot of diversity and representation in the types of figures that I paint. And that's really important to me. So I'll have different looks in mind, but as far as it being a specific individual, they're more from my imagination than anything.
And I feel like they all have a very dynamic and strong pose. They're not weak women. They're not just, hanging around. So is that something that is important to you? Do you have a lot of strong female figures in your life and your family that you
I think hidden. I have a lot of strong female figures in my life that hide their strength. Just because it's not something that is often celebrated. Being a strong, independent woman is sometimes viewed as a headache or a difficult person to deal with. Right. But I think deep down, the women are stronger than they realize that they are, and even I surprise myself. Yeah, it's just kind of drilled into women to be humble.
Right, and you're also, you're in the South, so it's a different, type of culture than the brassy New Yorkers that we deal with as well. So
I definitely exaggerate the strength and power just because it is just often hidden so much. I like to celebrate it in the artworks.
Well, it feels good, and I love it. And so were there any works that you'd like to, sorry, I didn't mean to put your video on. Were there any works that you would like to highlight, or that you feel strongly about in this series? I can't.
The figures, I think, are my most fun that I have. The hands, especially, I have so much fun, like infusing as much expression as possible in a single hand. Sometimes I'll get to do two hands, depending on the pose. So those are, I just really have fun doing that. I always have. Like, I guess when you're first learning how to draw, I was never really competitive in anything else, but when I was learning how to draw, like my art teacher probably said hands were really difficult. Right. I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to figure out how to do it. And so I still love really drawing hands.
Everybody's always so critical of hands.
Yeah, I guess it's easy to tell when you don't get it right.
Yeah, exactly. And I also recall, something that might not translate well on, in the virtual world or on Saatchi Art is how beautiful your resin work is. So I recall talking to you about how meticulous.
Yeah, it is very difficult to
pouring the resin. But
I'll do at least 2 coats on every single piece, just because there are so many layers underneath, with all the collage work on top of the painting.
And this is part of what I was talking about earlier, with regard to, asking for additional images and seeing works at the fair in person, because you see so much more of the detail with regard to things like that with the resin, etc.
Yeah.
Let's see. Has your practice changed at all during COVID? I know you recently had a baby, so that's
Yeah,
probably
I would say
changed.
that the
Thanks a
baby,
lot.
yeah, the baby has changed me most. Of course, the isolation with the pandemic has had an effect. You know, artists are isolated most of the time anyway. And so when you throw a pandemic in the mix and, you know, all the events are canceled and
Right.
show openings, it's really isolated.
Have you been
But
working
I'm
more?
okay with that most of the time.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean
I'm sorry, what?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Have you been working more or less, would you say?
I would say because of the baby less. I
Yeah.
have much smaller windows of working time nowadays. And I'm actually in a transitional phase right now where I'm going to create a whole new series of works based around motherhood that are in the very, very beginning stages.
Wow.
So that has kind of changed my day-to-day working. Most of the time I'm thinking as opposed to making. So a lot of like the pandemic, having the baby, a series transition, all that in the mix has definitely gotten rid of routine.
Yeah.
Every day is different.
Well, speaking as a mother, it's a fun change. It's a hard change, but it's a fun change.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your work with us. And we will ask Lisa to answer any questions anyone has at the end of the tour. So please feel free to follow up with any questions you might have in the chat.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Next, we are going to go to Jason Wright. Okay. Hi, Jason.
Hello, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. So Jason is no relation, just to be transparent. He is a multimedia artist based in, tell me how to pronounce this.
Ypsilanti.
Ypsilanti, Michigan. He has his MFA from UC Berkeley and has taught and exhibited extensively over the last 2 decades. I first met Jason at our Brooklyn, New York fair, and I was immediately taken by the intricacy of his work. It's almost maze-like in its twists and turns, and he uses a variety of materials, recycled and otherwise, and his painting, collage, and sculptures are some of the most spectacular compositions. So I'm very excited to learn more about Jason and his process. So thank you again, Jason, for joining us. If you would please tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you became an artist.
Sure. I grew up in California, and I guess in a family that was somewhat creatively inclined, I guess I would say. So grew up, you know, not thinking of myself so much as an artist, but always making things. You know, taking things apart, building things, putting them together. And that is something that certainly continues in my work now. That sort of, I guess maybe kind of an exploratory, analytical sort of streak that I have. I went to college and studied philosophy and art history, which maybe shed also a little bit of light into my sort of general thinking and process, in that I didn't really have a typical kind of training as far as a more of traditional technique. I was kind of mostly, I think, initially drawn to art as, you know, because of the sort of freedom it allowed you to kind of create your own path and way of sort of being in the world. So that's something that's really important to me. Out of college, I moved to New York because that's what lots of people that were interested in art did, and spent about 10 years sort of immersing myself in I guess sort of the underground scene on the Lower East Side there, and stoking up influences from all around. And
I read something about Max Fish.
Yeah, I was a bartender at amazing bar
Oh,
on the
yeah.
Lower East Side. Some New Yorkers may remember. And you know, wonderful, amazing people that work there that I got to meet and that became very influential to me. That were, you know, not just bartenders or bar owners or doormen or regulars, but these were also people that were artists or critics or you know, involved in the art world in their own right. So those experiences were certainly formative in for me to get a chance to meet that. I grew up in California. I didn't mention that I grew up on a farm in a pretty rural area. So, and this was some time ago, long before the internet. You know, I was a little bit culturally isolated. And then, so moving to New York was a real change of scene for me.
Somehow you made it back to a more rural place, I'm imagining.
Yeah, it's somewhat. I did after, so I stayed in New York for about 10 years. And I have always, you know, been a little bit torn between two worlds. I love the activity and the vibrancy, cultural sort of intensity of urban life, but kind of having grown up in more of a rural place, I'm also drawn to, you know, open spaces, in particular the West, and which it's pretty evident in just a few glances at my work. There's also a lot of these are actually scenes that are drawn from those early childhood experiences in those places. And then more recently, kind of where I started to go back into the landscape and more specifically draw on it for inspiration. So some of these works are even, a few years ago, I started actually going out into the landscape, and I sort of was teaching myself a little bit more about painting. And so I for a while, I was just doing actual plein air landscape, or trying to do it. I'm not kind of a self-taught person, but so literally having gone into these landscapes and sort of those, you know, studied those spaces, and that is it informed a lot of the work, both in the painting and then this other sort of collage oriented work that is most of the pieces in the booth are a slightly different technique, although I included those paintings because they're all seem to be merging a little bit stylistically in the aesthetics. Right. So I do have quite a wide variety of different work, but including sculptural things too. And it seems like over the years, it's, you know, even though there's a great variety of techniques, that the sort of the way it all looks, at least to my eyes, seems to look more and more the same, or like the same sort of different views of the same internal landscape, maybe.
Yeah, I definitely feel the landscape even in these collage type pieces, like the one that we're looking at now. Would you want to talk a little bit about the process you use when you construct these works?
Yeah, because it's probably not evident, and I wish everyone could be in, you know, in person in my booth, because one of the things I usually tell people as soon as I meet them, if they're asking about the technique, is I tell them to, you know, touch the work, because that's one of the best ways to kind of understand what it is. It's very hard to understand the technique just from the image, but basically, all those little pieces that are making up the composition of the picture are individual fragments of paper that I've essentially cut out into different shapes and then reconfigured or put back together a little like a puzzle. I won't bore you with too much of the history or details, but a long time ago, when I first, early on when I became an artist, I started to just cut up my work for a variety of reasons, but kind of out of curiosity or, you know, investigation. And that practice has sort of stuck with me, and it's evolved over the years. And it led to this sort of somewhat idiosyncratic looking technique of sort of a mosaic sort of feel. And it is actually like a mosaic in the sense of that they're individual fragments of paper that I have cut up and then cut and sort of fit individually together, so that when you feel the piece, you actually feel the texture of different pieces. And you can even see the pieces are mounted onto a wood panel typically in these. And you can see that wood through the spaces, and it's kind of a subtle detail, but that's even an important thing too, to kind of see that space becomes an important part of the piece as well.
They're really beautiful. And like I said, just seeing them in person was mind bending, because they are, the devil is in the details in these. They're so beautiful. And the work that you put into them is so evident when you see it in person. So I hope
Right. Yeah. I was thinking about that with Lisa's work, who I saw in person, and I've also worked with resin, and I was blown away. I was like, oh, it's so pristine and perfect, but also all the detail that's in there, that they're beautiful on screen, but seeing them in person, just so that there's so much more interesting.
Right.
Yeah. So you're not getting all that. One of the things that's interesting about these pieces, and if you can see them in person, is when you're able to, the larger ones just sort of, you see the overall composition, but when you look up closer, you can start to see what individual fragments are, or at least sort of how different each piece is, and that they all seem to maybe be coming from different places. When I put them all together, I try to create sort of a harmonious whole composition, but the pieces themselves are actually very, very diverse, and they come from lots of different sources. I think I meant to say right up front that the paper material that I'm cutting up and using is, for the most part, my own artwork on paper that I've saved and then cut up and reused. So not 100%. There are some elements that I use, like that one that you're on right there. I think you can see one of those little triangles is a map.
Right.
So there are found printed material and things of that nature that I also like to incorporate, which has various meanings for why I've chosen them. But the majority of the material is actually my own artwork on paper that I've cut up and re-envisioned, I guess.
And I was gonna ask you about that, because the environment and recycling, it's always at the forefront of a lot of collectors' interests. And I'm not sure that you do that for a greater global commentary, or if it's just you being interested in your own work and reusing your own work.
Definitely, and both of those things, and for me, they're related. And absolutely, yes, thoughts about resources and the environment are very significant to me, and are part of this thinking. But I would add to that I'm very much interested in resources, but not just the material resources that go into producing a work of art, but the other types of resources that go into making artworks. All art is resources, but it's also not just materials. It's time and labor. It's social and cultural material that goes into artworks. So yes, materials and resources, but in the sort of a real full spectrum of that, because I'm interested not only in the material that the artwork is made of, but also not in the physical material, but the sort of intellectual, social, or cultural aspects of artwork production.
Right.
Not just for both from my own work, but also in thinking about art more generally. And also, I guess another thing that's about that aspect of my work is I've always been very much interested in a kind of transparency or openness about the work that I produce. And I'm not sure I'm always effective, because sometimes I think the work is sort of hard to figure out for some people, but I'm trying to sort of make very literal, like, my process and my thought process. And that kind of shows in sort of literally cutting and moving, or appropriating, taking something from another context and putting it into my artwork. I want to make that sort of obvious about through my process, so that viewers can kind of get a, you know, an honest and sort of open sense into what I'm thinking and thinking about.
Right. I know, I was thinking when you were mentioning, you know, it's not just the materials. Well, it reminds me of what Lisa had just said about how the majority of her time is spent thinking, right? And so that is such a huge part of this, the artistic process, actually thinking about what you're constructing or going to construct. So yes, I completely agree with you.
Right. And, you know, I don't have any of my bins here. This is my small studio. I have a big studio that's just filled with, I like this one because it doesn't have a lot of crap, but you know, like I've got bins and bins of this
Oh, wow.
material just that I've saved over the years. And it's stuff that, you know, is material that you have to lug around, but it's also, what you said made me think of that, because our ideas are similar, these things that we accumulate over the years and that we process and then we change and we reconfigure. So for me, at least, there's a strong connection between the material fragments or pieces. Like when I pull out a handful of, you know, scraps, like I might find something from, you know, Max Fish when I was a bartender, you know, 20 years ago, or, you know, they're in all these pieces here. There are things that are maybe brand new, but there are also always little bits that maybe go back to my earliest days, and they have a, you know, someone else wouldn't know that, but for me it's important, and it gives the works a kind of a depth or a, you know, a dimension that for me makes them more interesting.
Absolutely. Since I asked Lisa, I'll ask you, has anything changed with regard to your process during the COVID pandemic?
Well, not too much, because I agree. I'm usually pretty solitary in the studio. I generally work alone. I love going to shows, and like doing the other art fair is a chance to get out and be with other people. So all my shows were canceled this year. So, but as far as my work, not so much. I've maybe, if anything, had a little more time in the studio.
That's nice.
I would say, though, we've all had a very interesting, if not difficult year, or even a couple of recent years. I would say that, you know, not just the pandemic, but social and, you know, global situations have sort of caused me to focus a little more. There's always been a social and political even dimension to my work, but it's kind of under the surface and not so explicit. But the work that I'm doing now is, I think, probably becoming a little more pointed in some of those ways, just as a response to recent events.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And we will circle back with you at the end of the tour.
Thank you for
visiting
my booth.
All right, so now we will go back to the entrance and visit Cynthia Grow.
Hi.
Hi, Cynthia.
Hi.
All right, let's get to your booth. Okay. All right, so Cynthia is a visual artist currently based in Florida. She paints in both abstract and also text-based conceptual works on paper, which combine both poetry and painting, both of which evoke ethereal and atmospheric qualities. I first came to know Cynthia's work when assisting a collector who had purchased a painting of hers at our New York Fair 2 or 3 years back. And I was taken by the moody and meditative quality of her work. It's very calming in its tranquility. And then I later became familiar with her series of love letters, in which she takes love letters written by historical figures and famous lovers throughout the ages and paints over the text in a way that elicits emotion, not only of the author, but the viewers as well. Cynthia studied painting in Italy and has exhibited extensively throughout Europe and the US. And we want to thank you, Cynthia, for joining us today.
Thanks, guys.
And if you would tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became an
I had
artist.
a whole thing, but I just have to say I've been riveted watching Lisa and Jason's. This is I'm going to maybe just skip ahead of what I thought I might say.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're going to go, and you know, it's incredibly nerve-wracking not being in person, but so much of what Lisa and both Jason said resonated with me. And here you have three different artists that totally different types of art on the surface, and so much of what Lisa said and Jason said incredibly resonated with me. I was riveted. I was like, wow. And so I had an idea of why I became an artist, but you know, in the end, I think that just summed it up. It's like, I wish I could be in person with Lisa and Jason. We've met maybe briefly at fairs, if not even that. What they articulated, Lisa's experience being a woman in the South, she's a mother, just the things that Jason was talking about, the things that Jason in California, then he's in Ypsilanti, Michigan, in the middle of quote nowhere after spending time in New York, which is kind of my trajectory growing up here in Florida after I won't say how many years coming back, after a whole lifetime of spending time in New York, Philly, Italy, Spain, all over Europe, and then coming back to my home, and having one foot in that culture and one foot out, and navigating both. It just kind of changed what I want to say. So maybe this is better and spontaneous, but I'd like to thank them both, if they're still watching, for their openness and giving me. It's kind of maybe going to answer the last question of like how reaffirming why I'm an artist and how things have changed in COVID, and we can do all this virtually, and I don't have an art community living in a new place, but to have that just virtually for a moment is everything, and it's incredible. So thanks, guys, for sharing, if you're still watching. So and we can back up.
It's another aspect of the art fair that I think is so nice, that if you haven't attended, you know, at the end of the day, we have, you know, artist drinks, and the artists hang out together, and they go and visit each other's booths throughout the days and see each other's work. And there's so much support and kind of love and community. And
absolutely,
so it is a really fun time to be had.
Yeah, we will again.
But you, just to get into a little bit of the details, you grew up in the States, but you've spent a lot of time in Europe. Is that correct? So you studied in Italy? And
that's correct. I studied in Italy. It's funny how, again, I'll go back to three very different artists. And I think, okay, Jason said he studied philosophy, Lisa zoology. I was pre-med, got accepted into medical school, and did that whole track, and went through a lot of life changes in my mid-20s. I won't bore everybody with the story. A lot of life changes for 5 years, 6 years. Was going to go to medical school. A few big things happened in my life. I've always been an artist, as most artists will tell you, but never thought that was a viable career. Always going on the medical track, being intellectual, and a lot of big changes, including a suicide of my friend, a divorce. And one night I just woke up after all of this stuff had happened, after a period of 3 months, and thought, I really just want to go to Italy and paint.
Wow.
And
you did it.
Personal, but I guess is it interesting? Is it not? It's my story. And I thought, yeah, one day I'll do that. And then one day I woke up and I thought, you know, if not now, when? When am I going to do this? When am I going to do this? And I just sold everything. I worked for a year to save up money to go to Italy, and I studied painting. I studied painting in Florence, in Rome, doing, you know, classical painting, learning all the techniques, and just dropping everything and doing it, and just dropping who I was and becoming who I am and who I'm still becoming. So.
And you have spent a lot of time in Spain as well.
Absolutely. So that came about doing different art residencies. I just so happened to get an art residency in Barcelona, or a little small town outside of Barcelona in the area that's known as Catalonia. And I was going to go for a month, and I ended up staying for a year. They hired me to run the art residency, and I worked there, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. I fell in love with Italy when I was there, but I can't really explain how that changed me. It just, the people that were running the art residency took me in, and I was going through a lot of things, and the landscape of Catalonia, the stories, everything, it just inspired me so much that I'm still trying to, in these pieces that you're seeing now, articulate what the meaning is of that, and I still don't know.
And so, and just since we're talking about process, you are primarily a painter, correct?
Yes.
And so what is your process when you come to create a new work?
Well, again, it's like Lisa and Jason said, it's the same thing. I can spend a week or two or a month thinking about something before I actually come down to it. It's a lot of time thinking. It's a lot of time reading poetry, looking at the sea, gazing at things, getting all of this in my mind before I actually sat down to paint. When I was in Catalonia, in Spain, which is Catalonia, which we call Catalonia, I came there at a time that was the independence movement was fomenting, and I won't go into political things about that, but I had studied literature and poetry in my master's degree, and had the way for me to learn the language, because it's not Spanish, it's not Italian. Italian is my second language. Trying to learn, you think, Catalan Spanish, or they think it's a dialect. It's not a dialect. It's closer to French. It's a Latin-based language. So the only way I could learn it for some reason was buying poetry books. So I'd purchase these poetry books or find them in flea markets, and I found this whole wealth of literature for me, thinking that, I'm worldly. I know about world literature and poetry. I have a degree in it. Never had I discovered these poets that were expressing the landscape of Catalonia, the history, actually the dirty history of a lot of things, which again I won't go into. So it always comes back to the land, the earth, the sea, the sky, everything that you can imagine for Catalonia, and the poetry is absolutely what resonates with me. So that's how I approach when I paint. I will read a poetry book, and then I get a vision in my mind, and then I go to town.
I see that. And then I also love your series where you paint on the love letters too. So I encourage anyone watching to view your portfolio, because they can see your work, that work as well. And it does, we've talked a lot about it within our team about that series, because it's just so beautiful. And I don't know, it's just the color. You use a lot of red. It really evokes this like emotion of love, but you're drawn into the actual text, and then you feel a different sense when you look at it with the color applied. So
thank you. I'm not featuring these here, but I encourage anybody that's watching to go into my Saatchi page on the collections, because it looks like it's so scattered, but everything, it looks like 2 or 3 different bodies of work, and it is, but it's not. Everything that I do is based on language and poetry. whether it's these more emotive works that are based on just the pure landscape of Catalonia. I'm working with the winery right now in Catalonia. I don't want to sound like a commercial. That this is how it started, which might come to your last question about how have things changed with COVID and the lockdown. Is that I haven't been able to travel. I usually spend 3 to 6 months a year there, and I have no family history, nothing there other than 15 years now of going there every year with family of friends who have welcomed me and have shown me many different things. So I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm getting off topic, but it's about the inspiration of what I do. It's finding this literature and poetry that always comes back in the work. It's about the land, it's about the sea, it's about the words, it's about the history of a place that I just, for whatever reason, feel very connected to.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Cynthia.
You're welcome.
It's really been a pleasure getting to see your work and talk about it. I think I will invite the other artist on. If anybody has any questions, they can post them in the chat for the Q&A. And I'll be happy to pose the questions to the artist here. Let's see. I'm just looking and seeing if anything. We had some questions about the technology on the site, so we can answer that separately. I guess we could just talk a little bit about, Cynthia mentioned how she felt inspired by your talks, Jason and Lisa. So thank you. Do you guys get a lot of inspiration from the artistic community that you are surrounded by? Are you in a community where you live, or is the exhibiting at fairs like the other art fair the primary opportunity to see other artists' work?
I guess I'll go first.
Sure.
Yeah, the energy at the in real life fair is so inspiring and fun, and I guess because the opposite is most of my life. I live in a not super huge city. There is an art scene here, but it is very small compared to the energy that's at a fair. So I do miss that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I do like to go to the fair to share my work with people, but it's also, I think I like as much being there to soak up the work of others, talk with artists, meet other artists, and the people that are attending. There's so much that happens as an artist that is solitary, and I guess I like some of that, but I get plenty of that, and it's a real treat to get to engage.
Come up for air.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I think for us, I mean, I love that Saatchi Art exists. I love that as a team we can see your work and so many thousands of artists' work worldwide. But there is, such a great difference of seeing it in person and getting to chat with the artists themselves and just, seeing the details. I mean, I think that there's a beauty in both of the platforms. So, and we've learned over the years at how wonderful it is for them to work together, because we meet collectors from the fairs that become, lifelong collectors on Saatchi Art and vice versa. So, I get really excited when I see fair artists like yourselves just, sell throughout the year, and we get to ship off your work, or you ship off your work. I think that's one of the things that people who shop on Saatchi Art don't realize, that the artist is packaging the work, shipping the work from their studio. There's a tendency to think that it's, all housed in a warehouse somewhere, and you know, being able to teach collectors that you are a human and you're packaging this work, you're making this work, packaging this work and sending it off with love is something that it's really fun to educate people about. So.
Yeah, I think.
Question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, you go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, I just saw a couple questions for me on the little pop-up screen. I did forget to mention the surfaces that I initially worked on, which I always forget about something because I'm so like in the process, I forget that other people don't know what I'm doing. So everything I do is on watercolor paper initially, which I then mount to a wood panel to answer the surface question, what surfaces I work on. So.
For some reason, I can't see the Q&A. So if you guys see questions for yourselves, please feel free to answer.
Oh,
Lisa, did you finish your response? Because I see one for me, but I don't.
Yeah, there are a couple for you too. Oh, there's one more that I'll just quickly answer.
Go ahead.
The question is, how do I come up with all the patterns in my work? Some of the patterns I just they exist in the Asian papers that I cut up in collage, and with the exception of the cyanotypes, I do make those digitally and then print those and then cut those up. So some I make and some of them exist and I use. So that's all my questions.
And I see a question about the mosaic quality of the work, asking if I've ever done a piece with materials other than paper. And the answer is yes. And I do love mosaic work. And in general, mosaic is one of these things, it's not exclusively done with found materials, but a lot of mosaic artists do that. They use old tile or ceramics or other things. And so it's something that lends itself very well to you know, decomposing or breaking up or cutting up things and then putting them back together. One of the things that I've done is actually taking these pieces that I've made where the paper gets glued down onto wood, and then you know, pieces that I don't sell, it's just like the paperwork, eventually I'm gonna cut it up and do something else with it. So those pieces are more sculptural in nature, and so I'll actually, because they're artwork that have been put on like a frame that you can hang on the wall, once I cut them out, I can start to kind of build things out of it. So I'll build sculptural forms using a similar technique. I've also made I do sculpture and installation as well, and in that capacity, I use almost exclusively found materials. So the techniques are very much the same, although the look and the material is somewhat different.
And I do recall seeing some of your sculpture featured in your portfolio. So again,
I put it just for people to, you know, get a sense of some of the other things that are going on. I've added a few of those, sprinkled them in just so people can get an idea. Those are generally things that I don't sell. Those are works that I usually do more as a labor of love, or if I have the opportunity to do an installation somewhere, I'll do that work.
are there any other questions I'm missing, guys? I can't see the Q&A.
oh, Cynthia, so there's not much opportunity to travel. How do you find inspiration these days? It's always in the books and the literature and the poetry. For me, this year has been, it's a blessing, not to sound insensitive, but actually this whole lockdown happened at a good time because I made a big move from up north to here, which is a huge thing, selling my house and a huge relocation. So my life and practice hasn't really changed, other than in so much as probably the series that I'm having here. Usually I prefer to work a little more dark and ironic and misanthropic. And this, now that I'm settled and moved in with the actual physical labor of my private life of, okay, I'm in a new home, have a new mini studio until I build something new, is these works are a little more happier than what I usually usually present. But I think that's a good thing because I guess it's giving me hope for the future, for all of us to be together again somehow or some form, for me to see my friends, to do another art fair in person. I didn't want to do anything dark, and I just preferred to go happy and think of the happy memories of the sky and the sun and wine growing and springtime coming and all blooming again. It's just, I wanted to do just more, let's be happy about things and hopeful for everything that's gonna come. And get out of this, please. I prefer I'm in my studio alone most of the time. I'm cool with that, but I need to travel at this point. I find the travel in books, but I'm ready to go and do another art fair very soon. I don't know about you guys, but
Definitely.
On that note, I think we'll close things and encourage everybody to please come see these artists and all the wonderful artists at the other art fair. And if you have any questions about Lisa, Jason, or Cynthia's work, please reach out to us at curator@saatchiart.com. It's curator, no S, @saatchiart.com, or contact anyone at the other art fair. And thank you all so much. We really appreciate you sharing with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Hi, Jason. Thanks, Lisa, Jason.
Bye.
See you soon.